What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. I'm Shaw Local Bears beat reporter Sean Hammond. Joining me, as always, is Shaw Local's very own Michal Dwojak. The NFL Scouting Combine is here. It begins next week on Tuesday. In the past, we've heard from Ryan Poles early in the morning on Tuesday. We've heard from the Bears coach then a little bit later in the day. We don't have the full schedule yet for their availabilities, but that's what we're expecting. And of course, then there's 4 straight days of nonstop prospect interviews. Michal, what are you excited to learn about the Chicago Bears next week?
I guess just what their priorities are, right? I think we all know what their priorities are, but I feel like I'm interested to hear, Ben Johnson and Ryan Poles kind of get into it a little bit more, right? It's obviously just been like, the new coaching staff, what went wrong and that kind of stuff. And I feel like this will be a good opportunity to kind of get into like how do you fix what didn't work last year. Like I feel like a lot of what we talked about with Ryan Poles at the end of the regular season, and rightfully so, has been, like what are you looking for in a coach? Who's in charge? Like what's going on and all that sort of stuff. And I don't feel like we really got a good opportunity to kind of get into like what are the holes on this team, what do you fix on this team. And it's kind of the same thing with Ben Johnson, right? Because like obviously the only time we got a chance to talk to him was his introductory press conference, and a lot of that is like what is your philosophies going to be, like what brought you to the Bears and all that sort of stuff. So I'm interested to see, they got their coaching staff together, that they released that the other day, and now we're all full steam ahead, and like now we're focused on how is this, what are the fixes to this team to help them kind of realize what they were supposed to be last year.
Yeah, you're right. Like obviously, when we haven't heard from Ben Johnson since his introductory news conference, I believe it was January 22nd, so almost exactly a month ago, and obviously things were kind of surface level at that point. Yeah, he mentioned we got to fix the O-line. We got to get better in this or that area, but it was all sort of vague. And look, it's the NFL. These guys are going to be vague. That's just how it's going to be. Like we're not necessarily going to get great answers. You're not going to know what the Bears are planning to do based on what they say next week. But I do think that it's a good opportunity now that Ben Johnson has sort of been in his job, been in his role. He's got the staff together. They put the full staff out yesterday and announced everyone who's joining him. The next step is, turning that full focus toward the football team, the product on the field. And I'm sure that staff is putting together their heads and trying to figure out how exactly they can make this team better. And a big part of that, of course, is going to be through the draft, and the combine is a big step towards doing that. But yeah, I want to know what more, like now that he's been in his role for a month, like what does he see on the film, from this team last year? Because even just a month ago, he knows what knows the Bears well from being in the division, but at the same time, he even admitted, like, look, I got to dive into the tape a little bit more. So I want to hear what he has to say about the 2024 Bears and how that will inform his decisions moving forward.
And I'm also kind of curious just to know what is this working relationship going to look like, right? Like, what is it going to look like between Ryan Poles, and how much is he going to, rely on Ben Johnson, right? Because he's found a lot of good players, obviously in the secondary and other stuff, and Caleb Williams and other positions. But the offensive line and to an effect, the defensive line has been his blind spots, right? And it hasn't worked so far. So how much is he going to rely on Ben Johnson? Ian Cunningham, is he going to be part of the process? Obviously, he's a finalist with the Jacksonville Jaguars, and who still don't have a GM heading into the
that seems like a problem.
which is just again a good reminder that things could be worse, Bears fans. But I'm just interested to know what that relationship looks like. Where I think Ben talked about, like, we're going to be lockstep, we're going to be attached to the hip during the introductory press conference, and that's just kind of stuff that you kind of hear at the beginning. But I'm kind of curious to know now, like, what does that look like? Like, how much are you going to rely on him? What is the offensive line prospect, in free agency and in the draft? What is that process going to look like? I think there's a lot to learn through that, and I think we'll get a lot of that on Tuesday.
If you're joining us live here on YouTube, hit the thumbs up. That's a great way to support the show. Follow our feed. You can find out when we're going live. We're trying to do that once a week throughout the off season. and keep that going. I know we didn't meet with you guys last week. It was, it's February. It was a slow week. We decided to give ourselves a week off. But we're back at it. The NFL Combine is next week, and we're excited to get down to Indy and to see what's going on. If you're listening after the fact on Spotify or Apple, please leave us a review. That's another great way to support the show. And as always, head over to shawlocal.com. You can read all of our Bears coverage. We got lots of stuff up there. I wrote something the other day that was just kind of looking back at Ryan Poles' first 3 drafts in charge of the Bears. And, it is kind of, startling's maybe too strong of a word, but it is interesting, which is maybe a bad word because I think that word doesn't always mean anything. But Ryan Poles hasn't drafted an edge rusher higher than the 5th round. And you look at what they have this year with 3 picks in the top 41, 4 picks in the top 72, I think it is. There's probably an opportunity to do that. We know how much they need to find somebody on the other side opposite Montez Sweat. I just feel like this is the time to take a swing on that. We both agree that this team needs to build this thing through the trenches, whether you're talking offensive or defensive line. Obviously, the O-line was a disaster last year, but both of those sides of the ball could be better. Michael, if you're the Bears, like how much is the offensive line? Is it far and away number one? Is it 1A, 1B? Like, how are you looking at this?
I think it's a 1A, 1B situation where I think the offensive line I think that's your main priority this offseason. And I think you need to address it in both free agency and in the draft because you drafted what you envision to be your franchise quarterback in Caleb Williams, right? Like you need to protect him at all costs. You need to set him up for success because if you don't, he's not going to reach his full potential and you're not going to get the value that you put into him when you drafted him with the number 1 overall pick last year. So I think the thing is like the defensive line has good pieces, right? Like obviously you have Montez Sweat. I think Billings is a good piece, whether he's your cornerstone defensive tackle moving forward and that kind of stuff. You can debate into that and kind of get into that. I think Javon Dexter showed you some good things here and there, but he needs to be more consistent. And you never got that, that key piece opposite of Sweat. But the offensive line, when you look down it, I think you have one relatively sure guy in Darnell Wright, right? And then you kind of have Braxton Jones, who you're kind of like, well, maybe if you put him up, maybe if you surround him with better players, maybe that'll help him too. But other than Darnell Wright, I think you don't have any offensive linemen that you feel entirely confident in. So I think that kind of answers the question for you where, you should be bringing back at least a majority of your offensive line, if you think that they can really help you. And you haven't seen that with this team. They haven't been able to develop, the offensive line that they have brought in. They take projects with what we've seen so far. And I think that's the major reason why you kind of need to focus on the offensive line, because you want to, protect Caleb Williams and help him reach his success. But you even saw like everyone's talking about it with Philadelphia and to a lesser extent, the Chiefs and Detroit and all the good playoff teams have great offensive lines, right? Like that's how you're able to succeed. That's how you're able to run the ball. And that's what the Bears need to do. And I'm kind of curious to see, is this something that they dedicate like all 4 of their first picks in the draft to and all their free agency? Like, I think that's a major thing that we really need to find out about. How dedicated are they to fixing this problem and which path are they going to take to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. Rick Gonzalez in the comments. Good morning, Rick. Thanks for joining us. Says that Poles has addressed the lines, but the problem is that he misses more than he hits. I think that kind of goes along with what you're saying, where like there's been a fair number of sort of project type prospects, the Dominique Robinson, the Austin Booker, the Karan Amagaji guys who you're betting on their potential, but maybe it's not there yet. And when you're taking a gamble on guys like that, you don't know if it's going to be there. Like the only real premium picks that he's used on those lines were Darnell Wright with the number 10 pick. You could throw Javon Dexter in there. I'd say that's a second round pick. That's a pretty premium pick. I think both of those have worked out well so far. But yeah, like you want to see, obviously last year, of course they drafted the quarterback and they went wide receiver with the number 9 pick. we'll see, further on down the line how that plays out. Obviously, you look at what happened last year, you're like, man, you would really like an offensive lineman, but at the same time, you got to give Rome Odunze some time to develop. I think he's still going to be a really good player in the league. But yeah, the point being that it's maybe why a lot of those feel like misses is because of the type of player that they've drafted with those picks. You take an Amagaji with a 3rd round pick. That's a 3rd round pick is still a premium. You still hope to get a starting caliber player in the first 3 rounds. I think that should be the goal. And then everything after that is kind of gravy. And really the Bears have focused a lot, in rounds 4, 5, 6 on some of these linemen, and it hasn't always panned out.
Yeah, and I think that's another big question that I hope that, we're able to kind of ask, Ryan Poles on Tuesday. It's just, what have you learned from your past experiences, right? Like, obviously it hasn't worked the way they've been able to develop them, or their path of, taking projects in the mid-tier rounds and thinking that they can develop them, because either they're talented players, but maybe they misvalued the players, or maybe they just haven't been developing them the right way. So I'm curious to see whether Ryan, after a few years on the job, is able to kind of put into perspective, like, hey, like, our evaluation process was wrong in this. Like, we thought that maybe we can get this out of this player. He's not going to talk specifically about, X player, but he will say, like, oh, like, we thought we could do this with this. We haven't been able to do that. Or we missaw something on tape, or we thought that maybe we were catching someone off guard and we were going to get a sneak peek or something. I think all of that's on the table, right? Because none of it has worked. The development hasn't worked. The selections haven't worked for thus far. And I think that's a major question we'll have to answer, or he'll have to answer with, are they changing their approach at all with Ben Johnson coming in, with the new offensive line coach coming in, or are they just going to kind of continue what they've been doing? And I think that's a big question to answer.
CJ, I threw this comment up on the screen. As I'm pointing out that Gervon Dexter was a premium pick. Yeah, you can throw Zach Pickens in there too. And of course, that hasn't been as successful. He was the very first pick of the 3rd round. That's more or less essentially a 2nd round pick. And so, there's been some good picks up top. And of course, there's been some bad ones. Obviously, Velus Jones was a 3rd round pick too. That didn't work out. Not that he's a guy in the trenches, but you gotta nail these picks. Look, they're not going to nail every single one.
No,
chances
no GM
are,
does.
Chances are one of those picks, whether it's 10, whether it's 39, whether it's 41 or 72, one of those probably isn't going to work out. And I know you don't want to hear that now in February, but that's just kind of the reality.
And I think that's the value of having so many picks early, right? I think that's been something that Ryan Poles has done a really good job of. Obviously, he put himself in a spot to draft Caleb with the number 1 pick last year. But he has been able to, he's built this draft capital fairly well through different trades. Obviously, the Carolina one is the biggest one. That's how they get all these picks. But I feel like he has done a good job of setting themselves up nicely, for free agency. They got a bunch of cap space. They do have a lot of draft picks this year. And I do think, with everything that we've talked about, obviously, and the draft picking and the questionable selections in different rounds, he is in a good spot to make, big selections and big, signings this year. And I think that should leave Bear fans with a lot of excitement, because they're in a good position to do it. Now it's just determining whether you've learned from your past and you can kind of learn from those lessons and make right decisions this year.
Yeah, one more comment here from Rick too. Does Poles let Ben pick the O lineman in free agency and the draft? I mean, I think it's got to be a partnership. I think it's got to be both of them on the same page, especially when you're talking about any big money deals, the number 10 pick. Like, these guys are going to put their heads together and have a plan. I would imagine it's going to be kind of the same case of what Kevin Warren was saying about finding the right head coach. Like, they'll know who the right pick is, I would think. Obviously, you get to a certain point, you spend so much time like evaluating the guys at the top of the draft. I would think that they've talked that through enough times that they're going to be on the same page by draft night. But maybe where that differs is as you get further down the list, and there's so many names on day 3, and maybe the coach likes this guy and the GM doesn't so much. I don't know, who ultimately will make that call. I mean, ultimately it's the GM's decision. who they draft. But I got to think that they're going to be in lockstep throughout this whole process, Michael, because that's the best franchises. That's how it works. You look at, the Rams with Sean McVay and Les Snead, like that's how it works. Those guys are working in tandem.
Yeah, I don't think you pay Ben Johnson a top tier coaching contract just to, develop plays and, do,
Right.
gimmicky stuff. Like you signed him, hired him because you saw what he was able to develop with the players that he had in Detroit. And, Ben Johnson saw what a good lineman looks like during his time with Miami, during his time with Detroit. He knows what a good offensive line looks like, what skill players look like. So, yeah, I mean, is it going to be a situation where Ben Johnson wants a player and he's going to, stronghold Ryan Poles and say, I want this player, we need to draft them? I don't know if it'll go that far, but I do think that, they'll have a really good communication based on what we've heard from them so far. And I do think that, Ben Johnson's opinion will matter a lot because it is going to be his offense and it is going to be, his, neck on the line.
And specifically with the draft, these guys go through so many simulations and like the prep work that goes into that. Like they know exactly what they're going to do in every scenario, and almost to the point where it's probably predetermined. Well, if XYZ happens, we'll do this. If something else happens, we'll do that. I really think that these guys will come up with a plan that they both like together. And I don't see that being an issue. I mean, I think these guys are going to work really well together. Obviously, they've only been working together for a month. So we'll
Sure.
see. We'll learn a lot this offseason about how they work together, about what they envision for this team. And I guess we'll get our sort of first glimpse on Tuesday when we hear from them down in Indianapolis. Michael, another question that we wanted to touch on today, as we're thinking about that number 10 pick. I know the draft is still 2 months away. We're just barely like getting going in this process. I'm excited to talk to some of these prospects next week and get a little bit better idea of what's going on at the top of the draft. But as you look at that number 10 pick, is that where are your thoughts on tackle versus guard if you're looking at offensive lineman? Is that too high to take a guard? Do you care? Do you just want the best offensive lineman?
I think at that point, I just want the best offensive lineman. I think you figure it out. I don't think you're in a position, if you're the Bears, where you can be picky, right? I don't think you're in a spot where you can be like, I don't know. Like, I think we want to tackle more than a guard. And obviously all of this kind of depends on what they do in free agency. Like if they,
That's
sign
going to come
Trey
first.
Smith or, if they get anyone else like that, that will determine what they do in the draft. But I'm not too picky about it. I mean, I just think you have too many holes on the offensive line right now where you just need to take the most talented player that you can at every single pick. I think you just take the most talented player, whether it's an offensive lineman, whether it's a defensive lineman, and you just take them. And I think you just set them up for, success and develop them, because I don't think that this offensive line is really in a spot right now where it can decide, well, we need a guard more than a tackle, or like we should, I think you can maybe make the argument about whether you want to trade down and get more picks and that sort of stuff. If you're seeing like maybe the pick selection isn't where the value is and that sort of stuff. But I would say you just need to take the best player available at that point, because there are plenty of holes to fill. And I think that both Philadelphia and Kansas City has kind of shown you that you can't have too many good offensive linemen or defensive linemen, right? Because injuries happen, and you always want to stockpile that group as much as possible.
Yeah, my response, my thoughts on this are: did you watch the Bears O-line
Right.
last season? I really don't think it matters. I think you take the best offensive lineman who's there for you at number 10. Obviously, you can trade up a little bit, you can trade down. There's different things you can do. Again, super early to be saying this, but I just feel like they're going to stick at number 10 and take the best offensive lineman, whether that's a tackle, whether that's a guard. I mean, we kind of had the same conversation a couple years ago, not the exact same conversation, but it was, Darnell Wright was primarily a right tackle. Like, okay, do you want to take a left tackle or a right tackle with the number 9 pick at the time? Obviously, they traded down a spot, took him at number 10. I think Poles clearly just wanted the best offensive lineman he could get. And he felt that was Darnell Wright. And I kind of think that's going to be the same thing here. If Tyler Booker, a guard out of Alabama, is the best guy available, if the top tackle's already off the board, but you think that maybe this number one guard is gonna really help your offensive line, like that's okay. And I have no problem with them doing that. Of course, it does depend what happens in free agency a little bit, but I don't know. They have so many, like we said, like you said at the top, Michael. I mean, Darnell Wright might be the only guy on that starting five on the offensive line who has his job set. And so it's really kind of like a clean slate if you want it to be. You can debate about the left tackle, but I think they got to just take the best offensive line available to them.
Yeah, you need to take the best guy. And I think you do that with, the first 3 or 4 picks, right? Like outside of someone, maybe jumping out and someone's like, well, like we didn't expect this guy to be here, let's go after him. I don't think you look at running back. I don't think you look at tight end or anything like that. I know that's kind of been floated around there.
There's some good tight ends in this draft, especially in the first round.
And like I don't know if you want to have the Cole Kmet conversation about releasing him or anything like that to save cap space, but I do think you just got to focus. I feel like I'm going to repeat this for the next 2 months. I want this to be like the unsexiest like draft ever. I just want them to draft offensive linemen and defensive linemen, sign offensive defensive linemen, and just like, not that they could not be fun, but like obviously the wide receivers, the running backs, they're the flashy players and that kind of stuff. But the Bears have done that a few years and that hasn't worked, right? So like you need to just get the big boys in there, just get them from like the best SEC Big Ten schools and just plop them in there, sign them. And I think that's it. That's your biggest thing right now. You can't really divert from that because there's too many things going on right now where you can just kind of be like, well, I want the flashy player, like I want Ashton Gentry. I don't think that's in the Bears. That's in the Bears' future.
No, I think it would serve them well to have a completely boring draft. That's okay. Yeah, I mean, if obviously the diehard fans, the folks on the show here with us this morning, they get excited about offensive linemen, but
sure.
If the average run of the mill Bears fan is bored by the Bears taking linemen all day long, I think that will be okay. And ultimately that will be good for the team. Another comment here says, more important in free agency for the Bears, a guard or a center? I think I agree with Rick and CJ both said that they think center is probably the higher priority. I think I'm on board with that. I do think you need to, that's kind of been like a thorn in their side the last couple of years. Like they haven't really, I mean, Coleman Shelton was fine last year. He was a like your average baseline starter. Like he did well, and he started every game, and he was consistent, and he was there. But if you want to really upgrade that offensive line, I think you need to find a way to get an elite center in there, or at least a top tier center, and they just haven't been able to do that.
No, they haven't, and I think that's why I kind of agree with you. I think I'm going with center too. Mostly, especially because I just based on reading, guys, mock drafts and that kind of stuff, like it doesn't seem like it's going to be a deep draft for centers or anything like that. So listen, like I think the center position has become one of the tougher ones to find because, once you have one, you're not going to let them go, right? Like obviously they're very important to your quarterback's development. They're really important to making sure that everyone's in the right spot at the right place, running the offense as well. So, I think that's your biggest priority in free agency, and I think you focus on the guard and the draft. Yeah, you can sign obviously some guards or a guard in free agency, but I do think that you can find more in the draft than you can the center position. So I think I think you need to focus on the center position because you need to find a guy who's kind of been established, has done a good job, and has proven that he can lead an offense. Because I don't know if you want. I just don't know if you want to put that in a rookie's hands, right? Like, I don't know if you want to put a rookie in a position to, kind of help Caleb development as opposed to have a guy who's been there and done that. And obviously there's a big name out there in free agency that I know everyone's talking about linking with the Bears, but I do think that center is more of a free agency than it is a draft thing.
Yeah, just looking at PFF's top 100 free agents, Drew Dahlman from the Falcons is the number one center on their list. He's number 22 overall. They have Ryan Kelly from the Colts also in the top 100. And then Coleman Shelton rounds it out at number 100 overall. I mean, that's certainly a possibility that they could, see what's out there and just decide to bring Coleman Shelton back. Now you also do have Ryan Bates, but of course he appeared in 3 games last year. You're not super confident that he's going to be fully healthy and going to be able to man that spot for you.
Yeah, do you want to do that again though? I feel like
Probably
you need
not.
to. I feel like you just want to turn the page, right? Like at some
He
point,
will be a great backup who can play at any spot.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think that was the Bears' problem last year, right? Like they had a bunch of, not to look down on anyone, but you didn't have like surefire starters right on your offensive line. It felt like it was a bunch of guys who could play multiple positions, which is great to have versatile guys, but at some point you just want to have a guy that that is going to be there every single week and can kind of build that consistency, and that's something that the Bears just did not have last year.
Okay, we got a few more minutes, Michael. Who are some of the prospects who you're excited to hear from next week? As you're thinking about the Bears specifically, like I know everybody gets excited for the quarterbacks and especially in draft season, but like when you're looking at the Bears, like who do you want to hear from? Who do you want to kind of get to know next week at the Combine?
I think the obvious names are obviously like Will Campbell from LSU, Armand Bombo from Missouri, Calvin Bakes Jr. Just those top guys, just to kind of, I think you can learn a lot. I kind of go back to last year at the Combine. I didn't know much about Roma Dunze at the time.
Yeah.
I knew he was good at Washington. I knew he was part of that team. But I remember leaving that his press conference at the Combine being really impressed, being like, "Whoa, like this guy just kind of seems to get it, right?" And you kind of
Yeah.
saw him do that with the Bears his rookie year. So I know, obviously, how much do you take from the Combine these days? I know a lot of guys are kind of doing their own, aren't participating, or they're doing their own testing, and they just kind of show up just to kind of talk to these coaches and GMs. But I do think that you can get something from the press conference just to kind of learn more about these guys, how they could potentially fit into the Bears locker room, how they can potentially, take on more of a leadership role and that sort of stuff. So those are some of the guys. Obviously, it would be a dream for Abdul Carter to obviously fall to the Bears. I don't think there's any way that
I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. But Mike Green from Marshall, he's a big name to watch for the Bears if he ends up still being around in that position, and some of the offensive linemen kind of fall down. So those are some of the top guys. I think it's just kind of interesting just to kind of see, how what their philosophies are, how they feel about potentially playing at guard or tackle or different positions, and where they kind of see themselves, because what you played in college doesn't necessarily mean what you're going to play in the NFL. So
Yeah.
I am curious to see what their approach is to being a versatile player.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see. Also, I don't spend a lot of time focusing on the actual workouts because it's kind of like a lot of it's silly. Not
Sure.
a lot, but some of it's silly. But Ryan Poles does value those athletic offensive linemen who can move, and especially if they can move laterally. And I think that's going to be a really important one. Josh Simmons is another name to watch out for. The medicals are going to be super important for him.
Yeah.
He had a major knee injury, was the starting left tackle for Ohio State until midway through the season. That's going to be one to certainly keep an eye on, because if he's like cleared and teams are feeling comfortable about him, you could see him shoot back up boards. Like he looked like he was the number one tackle before he went down with the injury. That's another name to look out for. And yeah, I mean, some of the guys you mentioned, Will Campbell, of course, and Kelvin Banks, and Tyler Booker, the guard who I mentioned from Alabama a little while ago. Yeah, like I do really feel like the Bears are going to be zeroing in on these offensive linemen, and this is going to be a big week for them to sort of get to know these guys. That's the thing that's so important about the Combine, is you have that interview time. I would really recommend, if anybody out there hasn't watched the offseason Hard Knocks from last year with the Giants, like I thought that was really cool to watch the behind the scenes stuff from the Combine and what some of those interviews were like.
Yeah, for sure. And you get a lot of stuff, and it's not even just for the draft, right? Like it's a lot of, free agency. Obviously you can't tamper or anything like that, but a lot of, agents and, GMs and scouts just happen to be in the same place at the same time, and, maybe build relationships.
Yeah.
And that obviously happens a lot in Indianapolis during this week. So a lot of, free agency, you kind of, for the Bears especially, Ryan Poles has been there, but for Ben Johnson, you want to build those relationships and you want to, get those conversations kind of going, like, oh, like, what are you thinking? Like, where you think so and so would be interested in maybe going one day? Are they comfortable with where they're at? Like, and I think another big thing is you kind of learn what the market's going to be like for a lot of players, right? You kind of see, I know it was reported this week that the salary cap is going to go up a bunch this year. So a lot of that stuff kind of happens too. A lot of stuff is happening with the prospects in interviews and getting to know them and that kind of stuff. But a lot of free agency and a lot of the offseason kind of gets started with this week in Indianapolis.
This is one of the few times on the calendar when all these GMs are in the same place at the same time. And yeah, a lot of those conversations happen. I'm sure the Tennessee Titans will be having a lot of conversations about what they want to do with the number 1 pick, and sort of feeling out who, I don't know if they'll trade the pick. I don't know what they're going to do, of course, but if they're considering it, this is when they would sort of put the feelers out there and find out what they could potentially, who might be interested in potentially moving up. I do. We saw the Marvin Harrison last year, like, do the whole I'm not going to work out at the combine. I am curious to see. I'm sure we'll learn in the next couple of days if anybody is going to go that route. I feel like maybe Travis Hunter would be like the only name I'm thinking of where it's like, does he really have anything else to prove in a workout? I feel like probably not, but I really do think that is more of a, like, Marvin Harrison Jr. was in such a unique spot, and Travis Hunter is in such a unique spot. I don't think that's going to be the norm.
No, I don't. Unless you're a top tier guy, it's just kind of interesting, right? Because like those medicals are pretty much the only thing that you kind of hold on to, right? Like those are kind of the only thing you kind of have as an advantage. But I think it does behoove you to kind of just go through the process, talk to the guys, and kind of put your name out there, because as you mentioned with that Hard Knocks, like you don't know what moment or like what conversation is going to kind of put you over the edge, right? Like, or is going to convince someone that you're the person that they want to draft. So I do think that will probably continue to kind of have what we've seen in the past. I think Shedeur Sanders would probably, take part in most of the things. And I think Cam Ward, obviously, I know he got a flag for the bowl game and that kind of stuff, but I do think that he'll do a lot of that stuff. But I would agree. I think you would probably see consistently what we've kind of seen in past combines.
All right, we got to get out of here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us live. One more time, hit the thumbs up if you're with us live here on YouTube. Subscribe. We'll let you know when we're going to go live on Twitter as well. I'm at Sean_Hammond. He is at MDwojak94. If you're listening after the fact on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you get your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate it. That's another great way to support the show. As always, head over to shawlocal.com. You can read all of our Bears coverage up there. We're going to have lots of stuff next week from the NFL Combine. We're both planning to be there. He's Michael Dwojak. I'm Sean Hammond. This has been the Shaw Local Bears Insider Podcast. Thank you for listening, everybody. We'll catch you next time.